Hi, my name is Marcus, and this is a companion podcast for the C.G. Jung Helpdesk meetup group. I host live events on Zoom every 2 weeks about the concepts and ideas of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. Every event I give a presentation about the Jungian concept, so have fun with this event's topic.
Recording in progress, perfect. So thank you for coming for this very special event on relationships and Jung's ideas and concepts about relationships. And what this very smart, wise, knowledgeable Swiss wrote about and said about relationships over 100 years ago. And we should start where a lot of things start for Jung, and that is in the psyche. It's in the unconscious. And this has to do with the basis of it all. And I have here some quotes from Jung that describe this, which is, you cannot see the world without seeing yourself. And this sentence alone is something that can be contemplated for 5 years at least to get the fullest extent what this means, that we perceive ourselves first, we see our psychology first. When we look into the world, when we experience the world, when things are happening to us, we see this as objective, as something that is happening there, where we have emotional reaction to, and all these things that seem self-evident, they seem eternally true, and so on. But Jung is very much of the opinion that things get filtered through our psyche, through our personality. So us perceiving something, experiencing something is malleable. It's changeable in, let's say, in its severity, how it does affect us and what it does with us, what it causes in us. And this is what a lot of what therapy is about, how we can perceive our opinions and, let's say, internal constitution to make us more resilient, but also more understanding for the things that are happening to us. But yeah, you cannot see the world without seeing yourself. This is really something to contemplate. And he goes deeper into that. You cannot see beauty unless you have beauty in yourself, as you cannot see ugliness without having something ugly in yourself. And you cannot perceive a difference which is not a difference in yourself. You must have the possibility in your psychological system in order to perceive anything either parallel or different outside. I will return to this multiple times throughout the event when we go into different types of relationships that people can have. But we already see here something that I found quite funny as a picture, which is from Alice in Wonderland, where the smiling cat says, "Oh, we're all mad here." And Alice asks, at me. So this, let's say, self-referential perception is something that is very obvious for us and other people, but to see in ourselves is pretty hard. So we get right into it and start with the projected soul, which is, why are we interested in certain people, romantically wise? And let's start with this quote. Take the classic state of being in love, for example. The lover is obsessed with his complex. His precise interest depends only on this complex and on the things that go with it. Every word and every object reminds him of his beloved. So what Jung sees there, when we gain great interest into a person, that we see them for the first time and we fall in love with them and we're really attracted, interested in them, he says, we know nothing about this person. We cannot know anything about this person. This person has become the screen of our projected psyche. We see their things that we cannot know whether they're actually true for this person. And what he says is, we're actually perceiving the parts of our psyche that we're missing in our own psychological whole. He sees the psyche structured as this. We have our consciousness, which is the things we know that we can do, that we can all relate to us. Like, this is my name, this is what I do, this is what I like, these are the places I've been, and so on and so on. But there's huge parts of our psyche and the outside world, which he calls the unconscious, which is basically everything which is not within consciousness. So for me, for example, right now, what's going on in the apartment next to me, I don't know. I'm completely unconscious for the things that are happening there. But I might also, or very likely, I'm unconscious about the things that are happening in my psyche, like deep below that have an influence on me. Then, like, for example, a complex, that something like a traumatic experience or something like that shapes and forms my behaviors, my perceptions, my feelings without me knowing about it unconsciously, because I have, for example, not processed things. So this idea of complex started with psychoanalysis and with Freud, and Jung comes from a psychoanalytic school and took also this concept over. And then complex is just an autonomous psychological force that acts on you, like a little gremlin in your mind that causes you to misspeak or to slip or have an accident or misremember something. So it's just something that's always in the way and interfering when you consciously want to do something. You set out to do something, but something interferes. And for Jung and in psychoanalytic thought, that's a complex. And this goes, of course, even further when we say, oh, I'm suddenly very interested in this woman, for example. Jung says we are constituted in masculine and feminine parts in our psychology. And when men really get interested in a woman, what they do not immediately see is, of course, a woman, but rather they're seeing their own femininity projected to outside. And it's a kind of integration process to get to know then this woman, to get together with this woman, because it's an attempt to become a more psychological whole. And this is what I mean with, like, we perceive ourselves in the world, first and foremost. And this, of course, can cause a lot of trouble, especially on the long term, because very few people turn out to be our missing psychological piece, but rather they are their own persons with their own incomplete, struggling psyche living in the world. And this is what the second quote is about. There are people who have been married for 30 years, but who have not yet seen each other as each really is, only ever through the lens of the anima or the animus. So obstinate are those projections. This means we burden people also with our psychology that we project onto them, positive or negatively, which means if we fall in love, not really in the person, but rather the idea of a person, this person can only disappoint us because they're not fulfilling our psychological need. But at the same time, it's not really their job. Like they have their own life, they have their own struggles. And to recognize this is the hard part. This is everybody is mad at me part. It's self-referential in the sense of, I have my psychological needs and I want to see them fulfilled from the outside world because I'm projecting them there, because I don't really see them inside of me. This is what Jung talks about a lot. People look outside for the things they can't find inside. So the same thing is also true for women, that they see not the anima projected, so femininity projected into man, but rather the animus, masculinity projected into man. And they're also trying to become psychologically whole. And this is what Jung talks about in the projected soul or soul image. He calls the anima or the animus really these representations of masculinity or femininity that act in a kind of way as their own personality, as their distinct being existing. And this is then very similar to a complex, which was mentioned before, in the sense of it has its own agenda, it interferes, it does things to you psychologically, especially when you're unconscious of it. So this creates a whole lot of trouble when people start projecting stuff into each other and trying to see things there and expect things there that are not really there and that should also not be there. But this is what Jung really sees the basis of us relating to other people. And this is the unconscious. So we are not connected to people really through our consciousness, our, let's say, willful actions, our things that we know and what we can do and so on. But rather we're connected to people unconsciously because when we meet them, we are unconscious to this human being. And when we are together and spend time with a person, we can feel like an immediate connection with a friendship, or like this connection in the sense of, I really don't like this person. And Jung says this happens through the unconscious in both people. So the psychological background processes that are running at the back of your psyche constantly, which are influencing not only your thoughts and behaviors, but also in the other person and also between each other. So it is entirely possible that you're unconsciously connected to a person, but consciously you're not really aware of it. So this is what this quote is dealing with. One has to admit that only too often man's unconscious makes a far stronger impression on an observer than his consciousness does, and that his actions are of considerably more importance than his rational intentions. So we have an opinion of people. So people can kind of pretend who they are. Jung talks about this as the persona, as a mask that we wear socially, that kind of image that we create or is created together with other people about who we are, how we present ourselves. For example, like at the beginning of the presentation, I built my persona by saying, oh, I know a lot about Jung. I have done this for a very long time and it's been going pretty well. So this is already a kind of persona being built to give, like, let's say, access to my person. But this can also be misused, and very often this does not work for a long time. Like we feel it unconsciously, intuitively, when people are phony, when people are fake, when people pretend. Especially when you interact longer with a person, you're like, something is off about this person. I don't know what, but like, I'm feeling a little bit strange with them. So it is that the unconscious and the things, how we behave and what we do, have a bigger impression on other people than, for example, what we willfully do or we say. For example, facial expressions or like bodily expressions very rarely are conscious things. They're happening unconsciously to us. Like my facial expressions to me are completely unconscious, but they're very conscious to you. And this is how Jung sees very often this kind of paradox or interplay, how we evaluate other people and how other people evaluate us and how we ourselves evaluate us. We are blind to ourselves and we see mostly ourselves in the world. So a big part of our experience is pretty blind. But other people, they can point that out, right? You can notice a splinter in the eye of your neighbor, but you fail to see the beam in your eye, in your own eye. So, but this is what we have other people for. All right. The next quote, that is a concretized representation of the underlying psychological fact that nothing is as infectious as real emotion. When you are in an excited crowd, you get excited too, even if you don't know the language. In an assemblage where everybody is laughing, you laugh like a silly idiot, even if you don't understand the joke. When you have to cope with real emotion and someone you cannot help by being infected by it. So, this is again has to do with the unconscious, with emotions, with things happening in the background of us. And we can be influenced by that very easily. Like the whole marketing industry is built on the fact that we unconsciously can be manipulated by images, by certain thoughts, by certain ideas, and primed to think and act in a certain direction. And this, of course, happens also between people. That when another person has an emotion that is kind of heat radiating from them that also catches us. When another person is very much afraid, we are also getting afraid. If another person is like in a good mood, we can also end up in a good mood. Or like more likely, when a person is angry, we also get angry. So there's an infection going on there unconsciously, unwillfully, that influences our behavior and shapes how we behave. So this can result in something like pathological relationships, which means there are types of relationships that are, let's say, mostly characterized by unconscious things being projected on the other person that they cannot get out of, let's say. So there was this example before, like when we fall in love with a person, we are attracted to a person, we see first our own missing half projected on them. But with time, this is highly unstable because you have like a real person there that will not conform to your missing psychological half. But if you kind of insist on it, this is a incredible restricting and damaging position for the other person to have. Same for you. Like when another person does it for you, that's incredibly difficult. And Jung talked about this in his therapy and with his patients, that they experience this through their partner that the partner was projecting stuff on them, that they started to believe about themselves, they're being unconsciously influenced to be pushed into a certain direction. And this, when we talk about stuff in our conscious that we are not aware of or we don't want to be aware of, is very often negative parts of our psyche. So Jung calls this the shadow, where we put like stuff we don't want to deal with. So it's way easier to put it outside and put it onto another person, or rather also see it in another person, because we perceive ourselves, we perceive our own psychology. And this is what this quote deals with. A person may contain a devil in the unconscious, for instance, an evil part of his personality. Then in his vicinity, there is someone who is that devil. And an unconscious person is much relieved when someone else takes over that role, so that he can believe himself to be perfectly nice and decent. So this is a pathological kind of relationship. When you don't accept the things in yourself which are kind of also unacceptable or hard to accept, they will pop up around you. Because again, we see our psychology everywhere. So there's random people and random things that we create a huge animosity towards and feel it. And we blame the person for it. We blame the situation for it. But actually, it is the stuff we have not resolved in ourselves, that we have not integrated, but that we should. So it is that we kind of get lost there. And we are also unfree in the relationship, same as the other person is very much unfree in that relationship. A person can also choose to be unconscious. What does it mean? It can choose to stay in an unconscious relationship where the other person just kind of projects the identity of that person into them. And they accept that because they're very unsure about themselves. Or they don't want to take individual responsibility. They don't want to feel their own personality. So people get lost in groups. They can get lost in other people. And this can be a willful choice. And this is what the second quote is about. Eros without logos. So I have to translate here a little bit, because Eros is the feminine principle and logos is the masculine principle. Eros is about connection, relationship, and so on. And logos is about separation and categorization and stuff like that. So Eros, so relation without discrimination, inside never understands. There is nothing but blind relatedness. Such people can be related to God knows what. Like a certain woman who are dissolved completely in little happy families, cousins, relationships. There's nothing in the whole damn thing. So this means people can choose to become part of a group. They can choose to get lost in an emotion, like with an excited crowd, and do not feel themselves anymore, because they don't want to feel themselves anymore, because they have all these unresolved things inside of them. But this is not all. For Jung, it always gets a step further. So what we talked about until now was about external relationships that we could have with a partner, with an enemy, with a friend, like with a stranger on the street or a stranger in a crowd. But Jung goes farther in the sense of, he's saying, we have relationships that we also build inside our own psyche. I already mentioned that we are kind of fractured. We have our consciousness and we have the unconscious, and then our unconscious are parts that should be in consciousness, but they are not yet there. So these parts that are in the unconscious are so strange and foreign to us that they are perceived as human beings, as figures. So when you dream, for example, and you meet people in your dreams and you can have conversations with them and they tell you stuff, those are not other people. These are split off parts of your own psychology and your own personality that you're interacting with. But they're so far removed from you, from your consciousness, how you are right now, that you're perceiving them as other entities. And this is what Jung describes as the other, that there's something in our psyche that acts there as a second personality. As I mentioned before, like the complex, or the anima, the animus, or the shadow. So different figures that fulfill certain functions that are actually us, that are actually also should be us, but they're not yet there for reasons, because we're not so far in our conscious development. So what Jung says about this is the unconscious is a living, psychic being, which, as it seems, is relatively autonomous, or rather behaves like a personality endowed with its own intentions. And a very good analog or metaphor that also Jung uses very often for his concepts has to do with the body. Like, we have a body, but at the same time, the body does not always do what we want. For example, it gets sick, or it can get a cramp, or it makes weird noises, or like it hurts, and then it's like, oh, what's going on here? Like, for example, you feel that your body wants to move, or you feel that your body wants to rest. So you already know, like, the body is kind of outside of you. Like, you are also there. You have like also conscious control if you pay attention, but if you don't pay attention, like, the body also does things on its own. And Jung says this is also happening for us in the psyche with complexes, with shadow, with anima, and with animus. And he says this is what we kind of have to build a relationship with, same as we do it outside. The example that I'm always giving is, let's pretend in your apartment you have a dog. And the dog is a separate entity. The dog wants to do its dog things. But you're in the same apartment. You cannot ignore the dog. When you start ignoring the dog, both of you will have a bad time, because it really will try to get your attention. And it will get hungry, it will get bored, it will get annoyed, and it will get angry. And Jung says it's the same thing that's happening with us psychologically. We have certain psychological needs, similar as the body has needs, that we need to incorporate in our daily lives and into just our way of being. And the thing is then the question, okay, how do you do that? You have these entities inside of you, the other. And Jung wrote in a letter a pretty good description how it is, which is, it is a very difficult and important question, what you call the technique of dealing with the shadow, so sometimes also known as shadow work or shadow integration. There is, as a matter of fact, no technique at all, inasmuch as technique means that there is a known or perhaps even pre-describable way to deal with a certain difficulty or task. It is rather a dealing comparable to diplomacy or statesmanship. So the shadow, where the main emotion is hate, that we feel, and that's projected on other people, that we, for example, hate other people or hate certain things. Like, there's 10 billion things in the world, but we hate specific people, very often close to, and very often people that we know, like neighbors or like people at work. So, which is kind of weird that these people you dislike the most are the closest to you, or let's say in close vicinity. He says there should not be this separation of saying like, okay, yeah, I will ignore them completely or will just hate them, but rather then the question, as we perceive our own psychology, why do I hate them? What are they causing in me that might be projected on them that I can't deal with in myself, that I can find there outside? So Jung looked a lot into Western mythology and also Eastern mythology. And in Western mythology, it is that we kill the dragon. The dragon is negative. Dragon is a shadow. And what the hero does and sets out to do is to kill it. But in the East, you kind of rather befriend the dragon. And when you have the gods, for example, in India, you have the good gods and the bad gods, they're sitting at the same table. Like, they fulfill their role, they fulfill their function, but it all works together in harmony. But in like Western mythology, like, you get rid of the bad gods and you banish them somewhere underground and bury them. And Jung says this is kind of like psychological thing that we want to do. Like, the bad things, they're somewhere outside, we should get rid of them, but they should rather be integrated. And this is a form of a relationship, meaning you have the dog, which is very unhappy in your apartment. You need to find a way how to regain and reestablish a relationship. Jung even says that about depression. Back then it was called neurosis, that he says it does not feel nice, it feels bad, but he says the psyche is communicating with you and saying, hey, you have to pay attention to something. You're not paying attention. So I put you in a state where you have to turn inward, very introspective, so that, as he says, you invite it in like a guest and ask like, okay, what do you want? Jung says that actually works pretty well when you just ask the figures in your dreams or in your visions, what do you actually want? Why are you here? Again, to build a relationship. And you're kind of, again, building a relationship with yourself, but it's the parts that are so far removed from you that you don't perceive them really as yourself. So the process of becoming oneself and to develop, he calls individuation. And like a big misconception that very often comes up is individuation and becoming an individual sounds something that you could do yourself alone. And Jung says, no, but he does not say it often enough. Like you need other people for that. As I described with this, you project stuff on other people and you try to understand it also to get to know the people. This is what this quote is about. There is no possibility of individuation on the top of Mount Everest where you are sure that nobody will ever bother you. Individuation always means relationship. Of course, having a relationship does not mean that you are individuated. For relationship can also dismember you. You can also be split into many parts, dissolved, if you don't hold onto yourself. Again, if you get stuff projected on you from other people, which can perfectly fine happen, you're also very in disharmony with yourself. But in as much as it forces you to cling to yourself, relationship is even the instigator of individuation. Anything that hits you on the head and tells you like, you're insufficient, you're incomplete, and you should do better is already a step of individuation and integrating things into yourself that should be integrated. And this is why he says other people are important, because they can point out the splinter in your eye. They can tell you how you're insufficient. And it's even when you, as a man, get into a relationship with a woman or the other way around, you become familiar with this masculine or feminine function, which is foreign to you, with somebody who speaks that language fluently, like an ambassador, that can show you a way. For example, as a man, a woman can help you to get into your own femininity and your own relationship function. And this is only possible through other people. You cannot individuate alone. We are not completely isolated beings. We are cultural, social creatures, not only internally in our psyche, but also externally. So you can only learn who you are through your effects on other people. By this means you create your personality. So we throw ourselves into the world and we try to experience ourselves. And we do this with other people and always hoping that they can bear us also in our weakest moments. But we do the same when they're on their weakest, so it all turns out fine. So this is what it's really about. It's about integration. It's about connecting. So what Jung says here is all our split off parts return. All the people we meet in life who have a fascination, influence upon us are really split off parts of ourselves. Things we have repressed which are brought back by other people. And that is the great value and the great danger and difficulty of human relationships. Again, if it's your psyche projected on other people and they have a specific fascination for you, negatively or positively, you can learn something about yourself by engaging with them and reflecting then on that. And Jung has this really interesting notion that when we come to this world, like our psyche and our personality is already there in the unconscious, but it needs a kind of unfolding over time, like a flower. For example, the symbol for individuation in the East is the lotus flower as it unfolds from the pond, like from the unconscious lake. It comes this like beautiful flower that unfolds. And same, we unfold. Like, for example, an acorn unfolds into an oak tree. All it takes is time. And we're born and we're small children. We're completely unconscious. We're just driven by wild emotions, like the psychic forces just determine everything about us. And we have to become ourselves, develop willpower, and learn more about ourselves during our life, going on this individuation journey and integrating all these different parts. And of course, this is then difficult because we're projecting without being aware of it. We're being projected upon without being aware of it. But this is what life is about. And Jung, dealing in symbology a lot and also religion, has this quote that I found very fitting. He must celebrate a last supper with himself and eat his own flesh and drink his own blood, which means that he must recognize and accept the other in himself. So this is from a Catholic or Christian mass, where the flesh of Jesus and the blood of Jesus is consumed. And similar symbolically, he says, the reason why we are so fascinated by these mythologies and these rituals that they're being performed every Sunday for 2,000 years is because they're telling us about something about our own psyche and our own psychological development. He says, this is what we need to do and what we do with other people again. So in the end, I want to at least give a little bit hints like, okay, if you want to have relationships not only with yourself and your projected parts, but actually like real human beings that have their own struggles and problems, like what are the things that you should look out for? And Jung talks there about humility. He says like this quote summarizes pretty good. If you are humble enough, you will never be alone. Nothing isolates us more than power and prestige. Which means if we're inflated, if we really force ourselves onto other people, if we don't see other people, nobody wants to deal with us. Nobody wants to deal with, let's say, the psychological problems of other people, especially when you're not close to that person. But if you're humble and if you have enough humility and know your own bounds and don't force yourself onto other people and deal with your own stuff, this is then someone that other people actually want to interact with. This is what the next quote is about. Perhaps one day you too will understand and experience that only those who are truly and without bitterness capable of being alone attract other people. They no longer need to seek them out. They come of their own accord, specifically those whom they themselves need. So this is Jung's paradoxical view. If we want to get to know people, like how they really are, and if we want to build relationships with real human beings, we need to find a harmony in ourselves and we need to work on that. And we need to be content with ourselves and not get lost in groups, not get lost in relationships, but rather be content with ourselves. And then he says, like, all these things will develop naturally. He says individuation is a natural process that's happening all by itself. The question is whether you participate or not. If you don't participate, you won't have a good time, especially, let's say again with the example with the dog, you should not ignore the things that are happening naturally to you. And it is then that people can feel that, again, with the unconscious thing, when you meet someone who's really content with themselves, who's balanced, that you automatically want to spend time with them. But if you have someone who is disbalanced, you want to get away from them as quickly as possible. And same with oneself also. So it is a big task, and it is basically the task of our lives, because Jung says individuation does not end. Our psychological development does not end. It's not a given that we develop psychologically. He says there are people that go into the grave as children, not having developed at all, not grown at all. But if we follow the things that are interesting us, or that's fascinating to us, and we reflect on, okay, why do I have these reactions? And we have this recognition that what we perceive is us, then things will turn out all right, and things will turn out fine. And this is the thing, what I like about Jung. Like, in it, he talks about horrible things like neurosis, schizophrenia, and getting lost in the madness of the crowds, and all these different things. But he says there's always a way out, and that's very often the, let's say, natural way. We have to pay attention, and we have to go along. And this would be my final words and the conclusion for this event's topic, which is on relationships. And I want to thank you for your attention. And yeah, I'm very curious now about the discussion part, how that will play out. So thank you. This was this event's topic. Thanks for tuning in. If you're interested in learning more about Jung, please check out the description.